Hi, and welcome to the second episode of Digital Defenders, a podcast and video series that we are doing here at TechAdvisor. My name's Henry. I'm here with Dom and Jim as well.
Hi.
Thanks for
Hi.
coming again, guys. So today we are going to be discussing how to stay in control of your online data, what that looks like, from best practices to certain bits of software that can use. I like to think of us as the digital defenders, but really it is the services we're talking about. So to start it off, we all sign up to things online. You have to use an email address and a password. That's your normal setup. So we thought we would start by taking a look at the best practices for doing those things, because we all have social logins and things like that for those websites. But Jim, if we start off with scam emails, it's quite a big topic, and we're not all going to answer to our long-lost relatives on emails. Sometimes it's obvious when something's a scam if it's badly worded, if it comes from an email address with loads of numbers and you don't know who the person is. But there are certain emails from companies pretending to be, say, Apple, saying, oh, you need to send us your Apple password because you've been locked out of your account. They're quite frequent, aren't they?
They are. And they're getting better, actually. They're getting more convincing, because you'll probably find in your inbox that if you use Gmail, it will luckily filter out a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
So you will never see it, which is great. So, that's one of the reasons why I prefer to use Gmail, because it does filter out a lot of that stuff. But what worries me is that a lot of people are vulnerable and they wouldn't necessarily spot a scam email. So it's worth bearing in mind that, I think you mentioned it already, but don't ever give out your details, any sensitive details. No one will cold call you from any of those companies or cold email you suggesting that you need to hand over your password or your email address or any other details, certainly no financial details. It's very easy to be convinced that it is real.
The other thing I think to look out for with that is, you may think, it's one thing to think don't email and send over your password or whatever, but you also need to check if there's sort of a link that you click on. They might build a sort of spoof website that looks an awful lot like an Apple login page or something. So you just really, even if you click through and it looks like you're on the Apple website, double check the URL.
Totally.
Absolutely make sure it's the URL you know, that it's got HTTPS at the front of it, that there's no extra bits before the .com, because that will be a sign that actually it's not on the Apple domain. They've just put apple.something.com.
That's a really good point, because if you're ever in doubt, then just type the web address yourself. Just type it into the browser. If you have to Google it, then Google it. But again, use your points to say, make sure that it is the correct website and that it is genuine.
And also, these emails are obviously playing and preying on people's worry that there is actually a security compromise. So it's kind of a bit ironic that they are in themselves security compromises. Because if you get an Apple, if you only use Apple products and you get an email saying, your security is at risk, your brain is immediately, well, I don't want to ignore it if it is from Apple. But as a blanket thing, those companies will never email you asking for your personal details or PIN numbers or email addresses.
Always be suspicious as well if they say that your account has been terminated, or that you're going to lose access to your account for whatever reason.
Unless you pay.
That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. The only thing that you might get emailed about is that your storage is full and you need to upgrade it.
But they'll never ask you for a password.
They're not going to ask. They're not going to ask for your login details in order to do that. They might be asking for money, and in that case, that is legitimate. But you would then pay through, again, logging in properly through the official website. Then you can hand over your cash, but be very wary of everything. Basically,
definitely,
just think about it.
And that's a good place to start. The internet is a big scary place. And on that point, so usually those companies, the bigger names like Google and Apple and Facebook, they will be the companies that people tend to impersonate to target people, right?
And banks as well.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. It's a minefield, isn't it? So never give away your bank details. The second thing I wanted to discuss was in relation to more in relation to services we sign up for that aren't the major companies, where you need to say, go online to maybe a small shop. You want to buy a hat, like I did the other day, actually. And I had to put in my details. And you can't log in any other way. You have to give your email address. You have to create a password to use as an account for them. And that is so that they can store on their servers your postal address and your card details if you want to. There are certain things you don't have to give away, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, just there's sort of the base information they're always going to need is generally going to be something like your email address, your name, and then obviously if you're paying for something, they need your financial information. But keep an eye out in all the films. You're filling in a form where you're giving in lots of information. There might be loads of boxes asking for information about you. Check for the asterisk. Check for which ones are compulsory. Why bother filling in the ones that they don't require you to fill in? If they need an email to make an account, give them an email. But if they also want to have your postal address, but they don't need your postal address, if you can make an account without giving them that, then make an account without giving them that. Why give them that data, that information, unless you really have to?
And another good tip is to use a temporary email address, or set up an email address which is specifically for shopping online.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
rather than using your main email accounts are free, of course, so you can set up as many as you like. Just have one specifically for online shopping.
Yeah.
And just, you can always keep, if you ever end up getting spam from those companies, just stop using that email address and sign up with a different email address.
Yeah, I mean, the added perk of that is not only is that helping keep your data safe, but it also means if they put you on loads of mailing lists, they're going into the shopping email address you don't need to check.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you can actually have all the mailing lists and the spam filtered out of your main personal email account.
Yeah, it's a great way to go around it. I have an old Hotmail address that I use for that very purpose, and my newer, I use Gmail as well because it's got quite good filter systems anyway. And then on that point, before we go on to talk a bit more about the kind of things that people can do to avoid giving away data, if you're suspicious of a service, just don't sign up to it in the first place.
Yeah.
A great thing to look at are Google reviews of websites.
Yes.
If you go and if something seems like a great deal, I actually did recently. I went to a retailer that I hadn't heard of because there was a coat I wanted and it was like half price and it just seemed really too good to be true. And on minimal digging, it was too good to be true. They had 1-star reviews across the board, like the product didn't turn up or it turned up damaged or it was the wrong color, all these different things. So really, just be sensible as well.
That's just a good tip in general. If it sounds too good to be true and you can't find anything kind of even nearly matching that deal, it's probably not genuine.
This episode of Digital Defenders is brought to you by Surfshark, a VPN service that claims to eat other VPN deals alive. And who are we to argue with an offer price of just $1.99 per month? In the UK, that's just £1.59. It's important to consider using a VPN for all your online activity to stay private, keep data safe and encrypted, block unwanted tracking software, and access geo-restricted content. Because you're watching or listening to this episode, you can take advantage of this special price that works across all your devices by clicking on the link in the description and signing up for Surfshark. It works out at just 7 cents a day.
Okay, so we're a bit more aware now about what you should do and which services you should sign up for and some of the methods you should use to do that. So say, for instance, I wanted to buy something and I wanted to use a temporary email address to do that. What are the other tips that you might have when I go about creating an account?
Well, obviously, we're talking about managing your online data, so just trying to keep your personal information safe so that companies don't get it when they shouldn't have it. And so one of the things that you can do, we already talked about it, is to set up different email addresses for different kind of online activities, if you like.
Yep.
But it's really important to use different passwords as well, because if that service, if one of the services gets hacked, then they end up with your details for every service, because if you use the same email address as a username and the same password, then that will work on all the services, and then potentially someone could log in and end up getting a lot of your different data. They can put a complete picture together, including your address, your birth date, relationship status, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I was it was a couple of years ago at work actually, but one of our colleagues had an ethical hacker come in, which is a funny title in itself. But he is sort of an evangelist, for want of a better word, for good data protection. Yeah. And he was showing me, like, if you were on an open Wi-Fi network and you weren't using a VPN, and I logged into something, and like you say, if it's not encrypted, they can just read your login and your password, and it's not even an automation. He just then went to another website, tried those details, and just got straight in.
Yeah, that's the risk. If you
because
use the same details for every site, then anyone who manages to capture those details, because you used an unsecure Wi-Fi, then has potential access to lots of sites.
And sorry, this is a slight side point, but also something I wanted to point out, that my mum once got mocked, probably by me and the rest of the family, because she used to write her usernames and passwords in a notebook with a pencil.
Right. Yeah.
But
that's pretty secure.
That's
actually.
pretty secure. It's more secure than using the same password for everything.
Yes,
not
very much so.
That notebook that's in her room. So slightly arcane, but it is also better than using the same password for everything.
I think we'll come to it a bit later, but there are also ways of making that data secure.
Oh, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll come on to that a bit later, so keep watching.
So something that people are probably seeing a lot more of nowadays are signing in using your social media information. It's usually Facebook or Google.
Yep.
Have you done it?
Yeah, I mean, so we were talking about this before recording, and Jim, I think, is going to tell us why you shouldn't do that. I can't wait to hear, because I do that for everything.
I also use it a lot for Google, but I think that's more because of my sort of distaste in Facebook of late, and I sort of don't trust it post Cambridge Analytica. So what are one of the reasons that you might not want to do that.
It's really convenient, of course, because when you come to sign up for one of those new services and you think, oh, I can't be bothered to have another login that I've got to remember or write down, and so you do it, but there is a risk. There is, of course, risks doing that. One of the risks is that both companies end up with your data. So let's say a smaller company wants to use Google's social login, or Facebook login, then they would end up collecting. You'll see this. So when you sign up, it will say Facebook wants to
like view your name and your address and your email address and things like that.
Contact list.
So it will say, they'll now end up with your friends list, potentially other data as well, and then Facebook may get some data from the other company as well as a sort of a kickback for using the
those
the
usually
social
terms
login.
and conditions that are not sort of apparent to the user.
And this is why it's always worth reading the privacy policy or reading those little, the small print when you sign up to those services.
Yeah.
But of course, the biggest risk is that if Facebook or Google or any of those other big social sites are hacked, as happened with Facebook back in September last year, something like 50 million account details got stolen, and that means that they've effectively got all your logins to those.
Yeah, it's
other
a long
sites as
domino
well as
effect,
Facebook,
isn't it? Because the whole Cambridge Analytica thing was that all the apps we probably signed up on desktop years ago without looking at the terms and conditions because I wanted to know like which Nintendo character I was like or something when I was younger, and like all of those apps then had access to my friends list, and that is how it then disseminated like misinformation basically, which is slightly off the point but shows how easily you can just be led down a paper trail that you don't even know about.
I will say though there is a trade-off, which is that at least part of the reason I use the Google login rather than just the pure convenience is there is a security benefit on the flip side, which is that you're putting all of your data in Google's hands, which is not necessarily a good thing to do. But if there's any company I think is probably going to do a good job of keeping its data secure, Google's probably it. That's one I'm not too worried about them getting hacked and compromised. Whereas this small app or website, I maybe want to sign up to buy something or use a service briefly, I don't know how good their data security is. I don't know that I trust them with my information. And sort of by using Google, I'm actually giving them less. I'm not sort of feeding them all this info. It's still being protected by Google servers rather than by this random companies that I don't know how good a job they're going to do about it.
So the trade-off is you get adverts in Gmail, but you're happy that your data is relatively safe.
Yeah, I think it's sort of you're getting more security, but only by giving it all to Google or Facebook. So it's sort of, where you sit on that side of the equation.
Can't have something for nothing.
Yeah.
Can you? Another thing that I'm seeing more and more, again, from usually the larger companies who can implement it on a wider scale, is something called two-factor authentication. Do you know what that is?
Yeah, so basically this is a way of making sure, the clue's the name, it's authenticating you in two different ways.
Yeah.
So one-factor authentication is just you're putting your password in. Two-factor is they're checking, usually by a separate device or something like that, that you are who you say you are. So the most common thing would be a text message confirmation or an email confirmation.
That
so
usually has a code in that you then have to enter on the device.
And this
that
is
you're
a
on.
unique code that's just for that login.
Yeah, it's generated at that moment. It'll be time limited. So after a minute or 10 minutes or whatever, it'll expire. So it can't be used again. And it's basically a way of saying, like, are you who you say you are? Well, if you are, you will have access to this mobile phone or this email account. And you can check that to then confirm you are the person logging in. You've probably used it all the time on banking apps in particular. Use this
exactly.
Pretty religiously.
Yeah, banks are very good at it. Even you get, if I set up a new payee on my account, I even get a text message which just says, "Did you just do this? If not, call this number." So yeah, that sort of thing is good. And you also get it on Apple devices. They've always had, well, for a good while now, had good two-factor authentication. If you try and sign into even like your iCloud account on a desktop, you will get a 6-digit code sent to your device, whether that's like an iPad or your iPhone, and you have to enter it. So it can get you in a bit of a sticky situation sometimes if you want to access something and say your iPad's not here. You do have to wait to be in control of that device.
Yeah, it can work against you because it obviously is less convenient, but actually living with that is a better compromise than risking your data.
It's better than you hacking me and then putting my details into iCloud and then you getting all my info that way. You'd much rather just wait a few hours and get the code right.
That's it.
So two-factor authentication is something we would recommend signing up for. And again, like Dom said, it's usually linked to your phone number, but it could be another email address. That's another reason to use a temporary email address for stuff like that, because you can have two and use them to authenticate each other.
And particularly if it's tied to a device, it just means someone getting your data isn't enough. They also need to have the physical device to be able to access it. They need to have that device with your SIM card in, or sometimes it's tied to an app installed on that particular device, and that pops it up. Like for Steam, the PC gaming platform, you have to use the Steam Guard app on that specific phone, and it generates a timestamp code. And if you don't, it basically ties your physical security and your data security together, so that as long as you have control of your physical devices, you still have control of your data, which is really important.
And before we move on, it's also pretty good practice just to have a VPN running at some point anyway, because when you're using all these things, particularly like we said in a previous episode, when you're using public Wi-Fi, and there's no harm to encrypt what you're sending over, because if someone does get hold of it, at least they can't read it.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you are on public Wi-Fi and you end up using one of those logins where it isn't encrypted, then you never want to risk. There's no reason to risk it when you can just tap the connect button on your VPN app. In fact, some of them will automatically connect when it's using a Wi-Fi network that it doesn't know or it detects is unsafe. So you don't even have to think about it. You may as well do it.
That's the whistle stop tour, and it is quite a lot to take in, and some of these terms are a little bit confusing, to be honest. Two-factor authentication used to confuse me when I didn't know what was going on. One of the things that I've personally used, and I think you guys have as well, is something called a password manager. It's basically an electronic form of what my mum was doing. It's a secure online place of storing passwords. Whether that the best thing about it for me is whether that's passwords that you have created yourself or are auto-generated. So I personally use one called 1Password. I think you pay for it monthly, but it is a great service. And what it does, if I log into Facebook and I have that login, it saves the email address and the password. And the next time I go on any device, it works across PC, Mac, iOS, and Android. That app will, when logged in, will autofill for you. You just have to authenticate yourself. So the reason I like using it on iOS is because either Touch ID or Face ID is very secure. You can't get past it with a picture or what have you of your face. So if I come to a different device, like I just reviewed this iPad recently, and I wasn't logged into some of my services, including like eBay, for example, which I have a really long, complicated password for, and I just had to authenticate myself using the app, which integrates with the keyboard in the device, and then it logged me straight in, and I was in, and no one else could have got in because it was my thumbprint. Have you had the same sort of experience with those password managers?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I mean, I was using a similar system to what your mum was using, and then I realised that probably wasn't the best way of doing it. And I actually use LastPass, and it's good. LastPass is free. It works across all devices. So, like you say, your phone and your tablet. And if you get a new one, it's very easy because you just install LastPass, and then you put your 1Password in, which is your really secure password.
You have to remember a master password.
You have to remember one password, but as long as you can remember one, which is pretty easy.
That's why it's called 1Password.
That's right. And that means you can then have very strong passwords for all your other accounts.
Mm-hmm.
Those long, complicated things with upper and lowercase letters, numbers, symbols, all that kind of stuff. And those password managers often will generate those for you. And some of them can even update your existing account. So where you've used the same sort of insecure password on some accounts, you can use those password managers to update those details to a much stronger password.
Yeah. Okay, so that kind of answers my question. So as someone who's very bad and doesn't use a password manager and has never used a password manager, and I just have this like library of passwords in my head, how much of a faff is it to set one up? Like how long will it take if you already have this mess of different passwords in different sites? You want to sign up for a password manager. Like, is that an afternoon's work changing everything over?
It is a little bit of work. Again, something for nothing, doesn't exist. So when I first downloaded it, you do have to it asks you to log in, and if you're on the site and it's already, sometimes Google autofills things, right? Which is another thing the Google uses to, when you go back to a website, Chrome remembers where you've been, and it will autofill your password for you. On the password manager, you do have to teach it. It won't just know. So the first time you log into something, when you have it, you have to enter your details. And usually it's automated, so if you go to a new website and put it in, it will prompt you to save it.
To be
you might
fair,
have to do it manually.
I would say that as long as you don't want to sort everything out in one afternoon, just wait until you log into those sites. And then, as Henry said, it will prompt you, like, do you want to save this login?
Yeah.
And then, so really, it is automated. You don't have to enter any details manually. The only thing you might want to do is to just put in a friendly name for that service if the website address is slightly strange.
Yeah, right, okay.
And also bear in mind that it doesn't necessarily, those password managers are better, in my experience, on iOS. I've just actually moved to an Android phone, and I found that LastPass can be a bit clunky, and it certainly isn't as nice to use.
It's because, in iOS, I really think it's connected to the fact that all iPhones and iPads act the same. So the Touch ID or the Face ID thing is always the same. Yeah. Whereas when you have iPhones, it doesn't know whether or not you've got a fingerprint sensor, which that phone doesn't have.
Right.
or if you're using some sort of Face ID, or more likely maybe even like a pattern or a password. So
Yep.
it is a bit more fragmented on Android, but these apps do all work for that as well.
There is one other sort of Android and sort of Google halfway house if you're not quite ready to commit to a full password manager. Is Chrome now does have a built-in password generator in addition to the autofill. It will.
Yes.
Sometimes you might see if you're signing up for an account using Chrome, when you go to the password field, it'll say like Google or suggests this password. It's a string of lowercase and uppercase letters and numbers. Again, that means you're putting all your eggs in the Google basket. But yeah, that if you don't want to have this whole separate account with a password manager, and if you want something that's going to work nicely with the Android and Google ecosystem, that is a sort of halfway step to using a proper password manager.
So if you're sitting comfy with Dom in his Google basket, then that is an option. But yeah, just depends how comfortable you are doing
I'm
that.
so embedded in the Google ecosystem, I'm stuck there.
Yeah, he's rooted. But that's not a bad thing, like he says. And it's good to see a major company providing that kind of service and recognizing that it needs to help us improve our practices in that way. Before we round up, Dom actually showed me a website the other day that I'd never heard of.
So this is basically a lot of what we talked about so far is how to avoid having your data compromised. The bad news I've got for you is that realistically speaking, your data has already been compromised, and even if you think it hasn't, it has. There have been so many major hacks of huge sites, MyFitnessPal, LinkedIn, Last.fm, Facebook. Like, your data has been lost by someone at some point, almost certainly. And there's a website called haveibeenpwned.com. Pwned is an old gamer term. And basically, you feed your email address in, and it will tell you if that email address has popped up in any of the major hacks that have then had all the data being shared online. So it's a way for you to find out if your data's already been lost. It will tell you which hack your email address was found in, roughly when that hack was, so you can sort of look, okay, in that hack, they probably got my email, my password, and my home address, or something like that. It also means with that bit of time information, you might be able to look and say, oh, I know I've changed my password since then anyway. That password's gone already, so I don't have to worry about that. There's also a notification system, so you can give Have I Been Pwned your email address, and then it will email you the next time that email pops up in a leak.
Yeah, we'll link to that website down below. And it is interesting, and it also it reminds you not only that yes, you have been compromised in the past, which is bad, but also that if this does happen, like if there is a hack, usually all you have to do is change your password quickly.
Yeah.
And then you're done, because without that, nobody can access anything, right?
That's right.
Sweet.
Yeah, exactly. And your password manager, if you use one, can offer to do that for you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, well, cool. That was a bit of a run through on how to control your online data. Definitely get a password manager if you haven't got one. Use VPN and just be sensible. Don't give away data that you're uncomfortable giving away.
I've actually got one final tip for you.
Bring
and
it home,
that is,
Jim.
if one of the things that you really don't want to risk online is your financial data.
Yeah.
So wherever
Yeah.
possible, pay with a service that doesn't directly access your credit card details.
Right.
So
Yeah.
PayPal,
Yeah.
those kind of things. Use those. Potentially another sort of prepay thing like Monzo. Does that work the same sort of way?
Monzo is a separate bank account,
It is a separate
technically.
bank account.
But you could sort of have specific funds you set aside in Monzo that aren't tied to your main bank account.
And
Yeah.
going back to the original email address thing, set up a bank account specifically for online purchases and
Yep.
never put too much money in it. So then you can't lose too much.
Yeah, that's great advice. And Monzo is a good example of that. And the PayPal point is a great one to end on as well, because it just puts that extra app and level of security between you and someone trying to steal your stuff.
And the same with using Apple Pay and Google Pay. If you're paying for something through an app on your phone, you can often now just select to use Apple Pay or Google Pay. Again, you're putting yourself in that specific bit of security.
Loves
But
a basket, does our Dom.
if you trust them, if you trust Apple's like biometric security, if you trust Google, then they've already got your financial info. It saves you giving that info to another person.
Dom, Jim, thanks a lot. Thank you for watching this episode of Digital Defenders, and we'll see you in the next one.
Cheers.